Sighed as I was greeted by a bitter evening wind whipping right through my hair. My cheeks began to redden and my eyes stung from the cold. I had just come out of the fitness center after an hour-long workout in the gym. I felt hot after my workout, but my body temperature dropped quickly when I stepped outside as I was only wearing this. It was late November and in the evenings temperatures were often below freezing. I exhaled deeply and watched as a cloud of mist formed before my face. I turned on my heel and began walking along the path at a quick pace. My house was a 15-minute walk from the center of town, and so I often walked home as I liked the time to myself just to think. 10 minutes and a brisk walk later, I was walking along the road which my house was on. Most of the houses were set back from the road, meaning the path can be a little dark sometimes. I heard a rumble of an engine behind me, but a few seconds later the car had not passed and the sound had been cut. I sheepishly looked over my shoulder to see a large black Range Rover pulled up on the curb about 3 meters behind me. I couldn't see into the car because of the glare of the street light above it. I snapped my head around and kept walking. The hairs on the back of my neck began to stand up and an uncomfortable feeling enveloped my body, slowly starting at the nape of my neck before running down my spine like a cool liquid. My heart rate began to quicken and I broke into a jog. 50 feet. 50 feet and then I'm home. I chanced to look back over my shoulder again to see the car rolling forward slowly. I gulped and sprinted along the path and up my driveway. I slammed into the front door and wrestled my keys into the lock. A loud click and I burst through the door, slamming it loudly behind me. "Whoa, Alex, you're in a rush." I started and whipped my head up to see my brother leaning against the door frame to our living room with a grin on his face. Scott, you scared me half to death," I complained exasperatedly. "What was that all about anyway? You jumped through the door like a maniac," he said, chuckling softly as he spoke. "Well, you know, it's freezing outside and I didn't want to let the cold in," I explained, not wanting to arouse suspicion. Don't ask me why, but I felt like it would be unnecessary to tell my brother about the car and how I felt, firstly because it would worry him and secondly because it would give him more ammunition for his constant banter with me, which unfortunately I wasn't always witty enough to keep up with. Well, actually, if you look at it from a scientific point of view, you would in fact be letting the heat out, not the cold in, because, Scott began before I cut him off. "Scotty darling, you know I love you, but I really don't want a lecture about scientific theories and whatnot," I said cheekily before running upstairs. I walked into my room and dumped my bag on my bed before grabbing a towel and heading off to the bathroom for a shower to relax my tired muscles and distract me from the thoughts about the car clouding my head. Later that night I was sat on my bed flipping through a magazine. My eyelids felt heavy and tiredness racked my body. I shifted from my position and walked to the bathroom to brush my teeth. As I walked past Scott's room I heard loud blasts and gunfire mixed with shouts and curses. He must be on his Xbox. I smiled lightly to myself as I continued back to my room. I was just about to get into bed when I heard a car door slam loudly outside. I crept over to my window and slowly opened my curtains into a gap just about small enough for me to look through. At the end of my drive sat a black car very similar to the one earlier, if not the same. A man was stood leaning against the car door on the driver's side. I could barely make out his facial features as his face was shrouded by the dappled light emitting from the nearby street lamp, which was hooded under a large tree with low-hanging branches. I looked at the figure intently, trying to pick out any characteristics about him. He was tall and very muscular. He wore jeans, a jumper, a leather jacket and a gray beanie. Nothing stood out about him. He seemed extraordinarily ordinary, except for the fact that he was stood at the end of my driveway. That was creepy. I was just about to close my curtains when his head snapped up to look at me. I couldn't see his face, but I could feel his eyes boring into me. My heart rate quickened and my breathing became shallow. I ripped the curtains shut and dived into bed under the covers. I heard a car door shut and an engine start before driving off down the road. I only hoped it was him. I closed my eyes and snuggled into the duvet, more for comfort than for warmth. I felt like it was hours before I finally went to sleep that night, but as my body was consumed by exhaustion, one thought stayed ever eminent in my mind. Who was he?